what story we're already in, what story we're telling. And at the moment, we have a mixed message coming out of lots of different mythological backgrounds. For example, when I talked about the hero myth and the religious myth and the democratic myth and the economic myth, the overarching story leading up to the war in Iraq came from all those four myths. Some people said, oh, well, it's all about oil. Another said it's about the axis of evil and overcoming evil. Another said, well, we're there to create a democracy in Iraq, or we're there to fight our enemies. So each of those, you know, when you tell a story from different myths, they have different consequences, and pretty soon people get pretty
invested.
There's not an overarching story that we can believe in that is a story about what the values are of what we're up to. So in a way, we're not very clear about the stories we're telling, much less being clear about a new story that we could tell together. And I do mean together. So there's another story about what it takes to even create a story. These things are complex. There's not just a content that's to be offered, you know, like here's the story. If you say,
right,
you tell this story, that
it's layers within layers within layers, if you will.
Well, and yes, and it also has to do with the process of storytelling itself. It's not about somebody making up a story and selling it. It's about a story emerging.
Do you think it's possible to midwife a new story for humanity with the U.S. government?
Yes, I do think it's possible. I just finished a book with three guys from MIT, Otto Scharmer and Peter Senge and Joe Jaworski, called Presence. And this is a book about how it's possible to do large-scale change in the world in groups, because I don't think we're looking for a leader on a white horse to come save us. We have to do this together at a grassroots level through groups. And what is it that allows the future that wants to emerge, and I'm sorry for this language, you know, I'm making it seem as if the future is destined and wants to come through, but I don't know any better language. But what allows the future that wants to emerge creatively in a group process? So there's a lot of process work to be done. There's a lot of thinking about the future, not using the old paradigms of the past, but listening, learning to listen with a great deal of imagination to each other.
And speaking of imagination, you know, imagination has a lot of attractive points about it. When people talk about the imagination, they often get excited about it. However, what I found also is in business circles, the higher up you go, it's considered like a place of fantasy, of unreality. You know, more creative people, I have found the more creative one is, one has more congruence with connection to the word imagination, the faculty of imagination, more comfort with it. The more you get into the economic myth and have integrated and absorbed it as it is, kind of like that seems like a place of unreality and fantasy. And yet, in my experience in the last 14 years, it's where I see the conception and formation of creative works, solutions, and industries. And I was wondering what you think the role of imagination could play as a faculty in these emerging stories for humanity.
Well, one thing about the imagination is that unless you've imagined it first, you can't make it happen. Something new has to be imagined. Even when it's emerging, it has the possibility has to be imagined, that there can be something different. I also think that, as you mentioned, a fruitful place for imagination to work now in the world is in multinational corporations. And although those are difficult breeding grounds for imagination, it's absolutely necessary for us to imagine new ways of being in the world together economically, because that's the engine that drives people to operate together, even when religions put us on different sides of some issues. I think it was Rizaburo Kaku, who was the CEO of Canon for a while in Japan, who said the only entity whose self-interest coincides with the interest of the world at large is a multinational when it's operating in a multinational context. That is, that's the only entity whose self-interest coincides with the self-interest of the whole. Now, that's a very interesting
paradox.
insight.
It seems like a paradox in a way.
Yes.
To an outsider.
Well, yes, because it says multinationals have a big stake in the world not dividing up into nations, because they are multinationals. They have a big stake in nations not going to war with each other. Now, that's a kind of opposite way of looking at things from our usual take. But if we look at it and say, what stake, and this is back to your question of why work with a multinational, if you look and say, who has a lot to gain from peace on Earth, it's huge corporate entities. Now, that's not why to work for peace on Earth. It's just to say you can find allies in the strangest places.
That's very beautifully put. Suppose a genie popped out of a bottle, and I think a genie's popping out of a bottle tonight, and the genie says you have 3 wishes for humanity. What would they be and why?
Well, in a way, humanity is always wishing and always gets what it wishes for. So these wishes are going on even as we speak. We are already having wishes, and the world has a strange way of manifesting our wishes. So I would say the wishes need to be larger and more imaginative. So I would wish for better wishing as one of my wishes, for more insight into what to wish for. That would be the first wish. The second wish would be to give a greater capacity to see the results of the things we wish for, to make a cause-effect connection between what we wish for, which is what we get, and what results those things create in the world. I guess that's a way of saying I would wish for a more systems approach to seeing what's going on in the world. And the third thing I'd wish for, and the last thing, is the wisdom to see that what we get and what's going on is far greater than anything we could wish for. So the third wish would be the understanding of the end of wishes.
I'm perplexed. The understanding of the end of wishes?
Yes, when you see the world as it truly is, if the doors of perception were cleansed, we would see the world as it truly is, which is miraculous and amazing and unbelievably beautiful. And if we saw that, there's nothing we would wish for, because anything we could wish for would be puny besides what we've really got if we could only open our eyes and see. So it'd be the end of wishes. If we could really see, we wouldn't wish, because we wouldn't be capable of wishing for what we've already got.
You sound like Rumi, the poet.
Well, I love
Even though
Rumi.
you act like Shams of Tabriz for a lot of people. A lot of people spin out of your offices, spin off the telephone, are whirling around the world after having conversations with you. So, you are Shams of Tabriz, but tonight you sound like Rumi.
Well, Kim, I have to tell you something, a secret you probably already know, which is that you can't tell anything to anyone who doesn't already know it. So if people come spinning out, it's because I've said something they already knew.
You're very humble.
No, I think that's very true. It's just a kind of flat fact. Only those who have ears to hear can actually hear them. So it's just a way of sounding a note which is already out there in the world and in the hearts of some people. So if you're spinning around, it's because of what you see inside yourself.
You're an excellent midwife. I can't imagine the number of products, services, industries, books, creative works, solutions that have been spawned out of dialogues with you. If somebody would track that, I think you'd be arrested. I think you'd be arrested for being an inspiration to millions of people.
Well,
but
it's just a matter of seeing the beauty that is already there.
Yes. Do you think that projects are animate?
Well, I have a strange poetic way of viewing the world in which everything is energy. So in one kind of way, everything is animate. Everything has its own identity and energy. And especially when people are involved. If you look at a piece of wood that a wood carver has carved with love, it's got its own life and energy. And so certainly a project that a lot of people are working on has a kind of identity and energy that you can actually feel in the world.
So some people think in the business world that a project becomes animate, alive, is, quote, real, only when it's financed.
Well, money is a powerful form of energy, and within the economic myth, it is energy.
Mm-hmm.
So in the way that light is energy. So what they're feeling is that it's in the same way that a breath of life is one of the ways that we characterize a human being alive or dead. A project in the economic myth, money is like the breath of life that animates something, that gives the breath of life into it. So on one level, they're quite correct.
Some people would say the spirit of the project does, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, in living in the world, the finances actually make it move in the world. And so, as I say, there's a way in which what they're saying is quite true. There's also another way in which a project can live in the imagination and spawn results that aren't exactly the same thing as what you would imagine a finance project would be.